podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
There's Taco Tuesday, Trivia Tuesday, and the Tuesday that unites all of us, Giving Tuesday, the Tuesday devoted to saving lives. Give now to help the American Cancer Society end cancer as we know it for everyone. Just $30 supports our 24/7 helpline, offering free answers and urgently needed support. All in for Giving Tuesday. Donate now at cancer.org/Giving Tuesday.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis podcast with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. As always, I'm joined by George Bellshaw, the tennis writer, and our in-house tennis coach, Calvin Betton. George, how are you?
Yeah, sorry.
What a start.
Wow. George, you've lost a bit of hair and aged about 10 years overnight. It's remarkable.
Steady on. Go on, George. Tell him how you are.
I'm fine. You nailed my answer, and it really put me off there, Calvin, because it sounded like we were going down the same road there. Yeah, I'm doing okay. How are you, Calvin? It seems like you wanted to get in there, so I won't hold you back.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just fuming that Cristiano Ronaldo's claiming a goal that he definitely hasn't scored. I was just in the midst of texting all my Man United mates the same thing. That's why I wasn't fully paying attention to James's intro.
It's a cracking start as always. If you haven't edited that out, it must mean the rest of the pod's really struggling. But yes, welcome back to the Love Tennis Pod. We've got loads to talk about this week. I've got George and Calvin here as always. We're going to have a look at the Davis Cup. Canada, of course, triumphing in that, and their great form in team competition goes on. There's also been Davis Cup draw. Britain have got a rather interesting trip to Colombia in February that I'm eyeing up, albeit it involves going from Australia to South America, which in terms of jet lag is about as bad as you can possibly do, especially at the end of a Grand Slam. We'll also talk about Iga Świątek and some pretty concerning allegations in Poland that she's been talking about. And we'll have a look at the beginning of awards season, because we are coming around to that time of year when we try and make up a load of awards. The ATP do the same, and then they just give it to Roger Federer. But there really is only one place to start, actually. And for once, it's not necessarily the Davis Cup. It's not necessarily Felix Auger-Aliassime. It is, and I think we probably sometimes understate how well Henry Patten and Julian have played this year, and exactly all of the accolades. And we've become so used to victory that we maybe don't talk about it, Calvin. Someone messaged the pod, and I can't remember who it was this year, and they said, "Oh, you always, just as you're wrapping up, mention that Patten and Cash have won another title." And yes, it's true, but they have won another title, and that is a phrase that you can pretty much copy and paste into most podcasts. But Calvin, you were out there in Italy proving that they don't only win when you're not there, which I thought was pretty valuable for your career. But
excuse me, they won 2 in the summer when I was there as well.
yes,
and all 5 futures that they won this year, I was there as well. So
excellent, very good. I mean, when we spoke to you last week, you just arrived in Italy and were still battling the grumpy hotel receptionist and dodgy food. But once the tennis got started, it sounded like it went pretty well.
Yeah, first 2. It was a strange challenger, to be fair. It wasn't a particularly good one, but I was talking to the tournament director and don't think they had much sort of fault there, really. It was a tournament that he said they'd been running for 4 years pre-COVID, and they were getting it off the ground, and it was quite a big success. And then COVID came, and they've not done it for the last 2 years, and they struggled for finance this year. It was in a particularly not a particularly wealthy area of Italy, to say the least. The roads were damaged and that kind of thing. And strangely, they had one match court at the main centre, which was a kind of mini arena, or it was a proper arena, actually. And a second match court about 20 minutes away from that, and a practice court in a different place entirely. So it was difficult. It was a strange week, to say the least, managing times and that kind of thing. because the transport network seemed to also only go through the main centre. If you wanted to go from your hotel to the practice courts, you couldn't do that. You had to go hotel to the main centre to practice courts. And then if your match was on the other court, you had to go from practice courts to the main centre back to the other court. So, yeah, it was a strange tournament, but yeah, did well. The final got a bit fiery. Played a couple of Italians. They had a decent crowd in, and they were quite raucous and not particularly neutral. Didn't mind at all clapping a missed first serve and slow clapping a second serve, that kind of thing.
I'm all for that. I know it's not the done thing, but I'm all for
I didn't. I actually didn't notice it. The lads were getting pretty wound up, but I was in the stand, and then when they lost the first set, I went down to the side of the court to purely to watch and not do any coaching on the side. And I sort of got a bit vocal myself. I didn't realize how vocal I got till I rewatched the match, but you can hear me. If anyone wants to rewatch the match on ATP Challenger TV, they'll hear me chirping away for the whole second set.
And definitely not coaching.
No, just purely encouragement.
I see. Very good. I mean, just talk about noise for a second, because this came up at the I'm trying to think where it was. Was it Paris this year? Oh no, it was ATP Finals when Taylor Fritz dumped like a simple put away backhand into the net, and then someone had shouted when the ball was in the air, and he immediately turned around and complained. And I put something on Twitter saying I really think players should get over it a bit. You know, in practice, there's loads of noise all over the place, especially, you know, on cramped practice arenas. And, you know, no one seems to be that bothered, Calvin. I don't know. I guess if it's completely quiet and then there's a noise, it could be off-putting. But doesn't tennis need to get a bit less uppity about lots of noise in an arena?
Yeah, I don't mind it. I know a lot of the players and a lot of commentators sort of hate the US Open for that reason. But, you know, a lot of the players have come through, you know, playing futures, you've got people moving and noise happening all the time. I think that's a fair point that somebody else said. If it's silent and then there's a noise, that's different than there being constant noise. The only thing I think it's a problem in the lads played a challenger in America or maybe Canada the week before last, and if you were at the main court, they insisted on playing like a full introduction with national anthems of the players who were coming on and big dance music at the entrance. And if you were on the other court, which was literally behind the stand, they said you just couldn't hear the ball hitting the strings or anything. It was a really strange atmosphere, but it was so loud. I could hear it on watching the stream, like excessively loud, and I can't imagine anybody in the arena found it pleasant.
But I think it's, you know, golf has the same thing where amateurs and even pros at kind of mid-level just deal with noise all the time, and it's not a big deal. But I kind of love it when, you know, when they're playing Ryder Cup, for example, and someone gets on a tee and says, yeah, bring the noise, like I'll hit through the noise. And I think it does prove that the noise is not the problem, it's the kind of sudden reaction to the noise, George.
What I find funny about tennis is that this really isn't a thing that's just limited the professional game as well. Like, some people at clubs get so angry if you like walk around their court like midpoint or something. Like, there is a bit of a culture in some clubs where you have to like stand at the side of the court while they're playing the port, and you can only walk around if the club's like closed off. And I've been genuinely like told off for doing it before when I was like a young lad. I don't understand how you could be like think that highly of your game, stood around in like a club court in the middle of Birmingham. To think that me walking around puts you off. So I think everyone who's bothered by it is pathetic, isn't it? Really?
It's people getting wound up about something that, like, because they want to get wound up about something, especially at amateur level, right? But yeah, I even at pro level, I do think, and I know what you mean, Calvin. Like, having gone to the US Open for the first time this year, like the crowd is a joke. Like, in the lower bowl, like people don't usually get sat down until about 30:15. Because partly because the stewarding's rubbish and partly because people don't appear to care. I remember I think it was during one of the Murray matches, and there was like a crowd coming into the lower bowl, and there was a bloke carrying four. George, what's the name of the cocktail that everyone drinks? I've forgotten the name of it now. It's something juice, isn't it? Honey juice. There you go. Honey juice. It's a sort of pun. Doesn't really work. Anyway, they're about $20 a go, and they're quite nice. And he had four of them in like a carrier, And he stood there, and it was already 15 love, and he stood there like handing them down the road to his mates, like being like, "Oh no, who had the non-alcoholic one, and like who had this one?" And whoever was in the chair turned around and was like, "Sir, with the honey juices, you're holding up this match. Please get on with it." But this was entirely different, I feel.
It's like one of those things, though, that tennis players get wound up about, that, like we spoke about the other week, how every single player knows that no one is ever sorry about a net cord, but every single player gets really irate if their opponent gets a net cord and doesn't apologise.
Yeah.
And the same thing in doubles with tag, like if you tag an opponent, like that's even worse because you actually intend on doing it.
I was going to say, when you say tag someone, do you mean hit them?
Yeah, you hit them with the ball, but you're literally intending to hit them with the ball and then apologise straight after, and everyone does it. But the outrage when somebody doesn't apologise for a tag, it's like, well, they're not sorry, they're meant to do it.
Is there an element in when you do like intentionally hit someone, like you're not supposed to try and hit them in the head, or you're not, or X, Y, and Z?
I don't think I've never seen anybody go for the head.
I mean, it's quite a small target for a start. It's not tactically.
And it usually go out if you miss it as well.
Yeah. Okay.
But I've never seen anyone go for the head. But yeah, I mean, it's in doubles, it's active. The Bryan brothers used to be renowned for it. I think I got told that when Johnny Murray won Wimbledon and he beat the Bryans in the semis, I think they tagged him 9 times in the match and apologised every single time. At what stage would you get on stop doing it? But
seems.
But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I told the lad the other day there was one of the Italian lads was playing very well in the first set, and when I went down, it's one of the things I said to Henry: you just hit him as hard as you can because they need shaking up. Like, you know, when someone's playing that well and being hit hard with a tennis ball by somebody who can hit the ball hard will shake you up, and it was a tactic, 100%.
Calvin, just like reflecting on this season, I mean, can you actually cast your mind back to the start of the season, like what you thought your expectations should be with these guys and just how much they've actually exceeded?
Well, I mean, they were both still playing singles. Well, I started coaching Henry at the start of the year. He was still playing singles and has had a pretty good singles year. Like, I think he's gone up 200 places in singles. But the rate that they've really kicked on since the summer, no, you know, well, you kind of expect it because no one's ever done it. They've won 9. No one's ever won 9 titles 9 challenger titles in a full year. They'd never played a challenger until May. So, I mean, it's a little bit skewed that, you know, it's like winning most of the second tier of tournaments. And it can only really be, they've only really won 9 because they started so low and won their first one. Like,
right.
You'd normally, if you're entering challenges, you'd normally be higher ranked when you start playing them, and you'd have moved out of them before now. So it's quite unique that they were winning challenges when they were ranked 500 in the world, I guess.
I was going to ask something similar, but kind of in a different way, which is that, can you put your finger on what has changed? I mean, obviously you work specifically with Henry, but you do work with a team as a whole. Like, is it just you've got 2 players who complement each other well and have gone into really good form, or has something changed?
I think it's been a perfect storm, really, in that regard, in that they got a good run of tournaments at Nottingham in terms of the futures tournaments, the 25Ks, where they had some sort of favourable draws that allowed them to get a nice introduction and get to know each other as a pair and that kind of thing at the start, and then got a nice run with that. And then that run, because they won all of those, they then got, you know, just, I'm not wishing to take anything away from the lads because they've been phenomenal. Their achievement is unprecedented, but just, you know, nice draws at good times have helped, and you always need that. If you look at any player who comes through singles or doubles, they get some nice draws. And, you know, I know the first one they played was Surbiton, and in the first round they played a couple of singles players, Stefan Kozlov and Denis Kudla, and Kozlov was injured when he played, and Kudla was still in the singles. And I know that day, because it had rained the previous day, they were going to have to play 2 doubles, and I never thought that Kudla was going to fancy playing 2 singles and then 2 doubles before the next day he would have to play doubles again, and a couple of times in tie breaks they've had a little bit of luck. They've also been bad patches. Wimbledon, nothing really fell for them that day. Start of this American trip wasn't that great, but then they've refound it. So it's always a case, especially in doubles, you need a bit of rub of the green and to get to know each other as a pair. And on top of that, they complement each other well as a pair.
I was also looking at their schedule, and when was the last time they've been home?
Not since the summer. I asked Henry the other day. Henry, I think, has spent 10 days at home in the whole of 2022.
Good Lord.
Because he was in America. I mean, his girlfriend's American, so he tends to go to America a fair bit anyway.
Right.
He plays a lot of tournaments there, and if he's got a week off, generally, or a couple of weeks off, he'll at the start of the year he went to America, but they've pretty much played all the way through. I mean, they've been in America for 4 months, and then I think they're in Portugal this week for the last tournament of the year, and then they've got a week off where they'll go home, and then we start pre-season, which will be in London for 2 weeks. Then it's Christmas. Julian's girlfriend is a tennis player, is Katie Stresnikova, and she's Slovakian, so Julian is going to Slovakia for Christmas. Henry's girlfriend is coming over here, but then they'll have to set off, if they get into the Australian Open and the tournaments around it, they'll have to set off for those tournaments on about the 30th of December, maybe. So they're probably only looking at maybe another 10 days at home.
I mean, it's one of those things where, I travel a lot for work at the moment, and people say, you're so lucky to do so much travel. And it's like, well, and I imagine it's similar for tennis players. It's like, well, no, because what it actually means is that, you're working long hours away from home, and it's just like working in a different place. It's not like you're on holiday, you just happen to be away. And I imagine it's quite similar for players, because it's not like you're doing much hanging out doing sweet FA.
There's none of that. A lot of the times, a hell of a lot of the times, you don't see anywhere of the place where you're going, especially as doubles, because doubles obviously follows singles. So you kind of practice in the middle of the day, and then you're going to get you're probably going to get, if you're lucky, if you get on before 5 o'clock at the start of the week, up until sort of Thursday, Friday, and then you're going to finish. By the time you finished at 7, showered, got back to the hotel, it's 8:30. You're going to get some dinner, and then you're back in the room. So you don't really see anything, to be honest. And there are some which you will. I imagine Australia would be different if they get to go there. I imagine New York's different. But I know this year, when somebody had said to me, one of the singles players who I know had said that he loves Wimbledon, because you're going out for dinner a lot with the other guys. You've seen a lot of people you haven't seen. I didn't experience any of that this year with the doubles play. With the doubles, I was eating Nando's takeaway in my hotel room at 10 o'clock every night, because by the time you'd left, you were basically getting, the only practice you could get as a doubles pair was when all the singles players had practiced and gone on. So you were looking at kind of a 5:30 to 7:30 type of practice slot. So you're not really, you're traveling, but that's really what you're doing. You're traveling. You're not seeing much.
Yeah.
In terms of Australia in the season beyond, what is the ranking cut off, and what does the sort of ranking they're at now actually change, if anything? Because I know a lot of the tour events are quite low ranking for doubles to get in, because you also have singles players kicking around in smaller draws.
It's not an exact science. Basically, to get it, the slams, the average, or what would usually get you in, not the average, what would usually get you in is a combined ranking of 140. So 70 each if you're a pair, or 60 and an 80 or something like that. So 140 combined ranking would generally get you in the slams. So they're at the minute, they're 150 with this tournament to go. I think final or maybe semi would get them into 140 combined, but obviously they're intending on winning it. It's different this week. It's on clay. They haven't played. I don't think either of them have even played. They've definitely not played doubles on clay all year. I don't think either of them have played on clay at all in about 2.5 years. But yeah, so that's for the Australian Open, for the slams. But again, this is the strange thing about doubles, is that and any tennis really, you're more likely to get in the slams because it's a bigger draw. So then when it comes to the 250s, that then depends how many there are in a week. If you've got 3 250s, you're probably looking at 45 combined. No, not combined, 45 each, sorry. So 90 combined. For the Masters, which is a bigger draw, it's a 32 draw, you're probably looking at about 60 combined, I'd say.
I mean, it's not easy.
No, a bit more. Sorry, I'm going wrong there. You're probably looking at
120 combined.
Yeah, 120, 110-ish combined.
So presumably the feeling at the moment is punting on Australia, and I mean presumably there's a bit of a challenger circuit pre-Australian Open if they can...
Yeah, there is, but there's also some 250s. I think they're hoping to get in 250s. There's one in India, which is probably going to be the cut will be slightly lower than Australia. Ideally, what they want to do is to go to Australia. I think there's 2 weeks of there's 250s in a row.
Yeah, Adelaide, and they're both in Adelaide as well.
Yeah, but I think there's also one in Auckland.
Yeah,
I think. But the feeling is that India will be the weakest. So I think the broad plan is to go to India, then the second one in Adelaide, and then Aussie Open. But it's difficult. It gets difficult now because then, even if they get in the Aussie Open, and unless they can have a real, win 3 or 4 matches there, they're probably still looking at going back to challengers for at least a couple of weeks. Yeah. Because of how the rankings work.
Because of the entry, because your entry ranking is 6 weeks before the tournament, right? So there's a kind of lag on your pickup in ranking.
But also, you see a lot of guys in challengers, especially in Europe. You get a lot of guys who are ranked 70, 65, 60 playing the challengers because they're not getting into much else.
Well, it's nothing if not exciting, Calvin. It's you must take some credit, and also huge credit to Henry and Julian because they've done a great job, and it's been fun for us having a very a little bit of a dog in the fight and watching their story. And when they're Australian Open champions, hopefully they'll give us the first big podcast interview. That'd be ideal.
Are they off to Saudi Arabia as well then?
The offer hasn't come in yet. But the price of flights to Australia at the minute, they might have to. The morals might have to go out the window just to afford those because they're not cheap.
Yeah, it's especially going out once you wait until the 7th, because I've been looking at Australian flight prices recently a lot, and basically once you get past the 6th or 7th of January, there's just this huge drop off in price, and it gets a lot easier, and you can do it for 1,500 quid return. But anything around Christmas and New Year just massively penalises you.
The problem is that, if you know you're going, you can get them. The problem is at the minute they don't know if they're going.
Yeah.
And that's that, so they're looking at the prices all the time and thinking they could do with something, but, that they won't. They'll know at the end of this week. That's the thing. Or they'll have a clue. And then they'll have to make, if they're not definitely in there, they're going to have to make a decision whether to take a punt on it.
When I went to Australia for the Australian Open, I took flights that I think I managed to find for 600 quid for ultimate bargain basement hunting, and it was a truly terrible journey.
What was so bad about it?
So the whole thing took about 35 hours, which in itself isn't great, but there was a 10-hour layover in Ho Chi Minh domestic flights, and I kept just trying to sleep in the domestic arrivals area or departure area, which was obviously pretty scarce.
So did you do an internal flight in Vietnam?
Yeah. So I flew into Vietnam, did a flight down, and then had 10-hour wait in Vietnam to get the domestic flight, and then came from there to Australia. And then it was the year where Murray was kind of coming back, and they announced while I was traveling that he was going to play that practice match with Djokovic. So I literally took my suitcase straight to the tournament to go and watch that, and was working straight away. So yeah, pretty grim times.
Well, I can confirm my flight is not, touch wood, it's not quite as complicated as that. I think I'm doing Frankfurt and then Singapore, and it's on a Lufthansa code share. I'm not delighted about flying Lufthansa.
Singapore's a lovely airport, though.
It's lovely. I'm going to be there for all of an hour. I went via Singapore for the Olympics as well, and it was... I'll tell you what was really weird about it was I'd been in Beijing, for 3 weeks in the pretty horrible conditions, and also -10 to -20 depending on where you were. And so I got on the plane, had been in these conditions for however long, and then I got off in Singapore airport in February, and it was 95% humidity and 28 degrees outside, and it was midnight, and I was just this is the most intense switch in temperature I think I've ever had to go through. It was it was.
I'm sure you soothed yourself by a trip to the butterfly garden or something.
I was again only there for about 3 hours, and I hadn't really seen any good food for 3 weeks. So I went and found the nicest restaurant I could, and I just ordered a lot of vegetables, and it was actually really nice. But then and actually I'm converted to Singapore Airways, so I kind of hoped I could go Singapore, but I'm going Lufthansa code share instead. So anyway, I shouldn't complain. I'm going to my first Australian Open. Got my visa now, so they have to let me in, I think. Let's move on, shall we? George mentioned Saudi Arabia, and now seems like as good a time as any to talk a bit about Saudi Arabia, because we've had an email from a listener. You can always get in touch on email on lovetennispod@gmail.com. Just send us an email, let me know who you are, where you're from, and what you want to talk about, and we will do our best to get it on air and have a chat about it. This one is from a friend of the pod, Danny Rogers, who plays tennis down in Dulwich and who works in London and is a very regular listener, and also a friend of the pod. That's the best way to describe him, I think. Anyway, he wanted to talk about Cam Norrie going to Saudi Arabia, which we discussed a couple of weeks ago on the pod. He's going to play the Diriyah Cup in... it is in Riyadh, isn't it? But it's in Diriyah, which is this kind of made-up place. Anyway, the point is, he's getting paid an awful lot of money to go and play in what has been described as a sports-washing jamboree. Danny says, Calvin's response was that Norrie was accepting money from a corrupt regime, whereas Russian players, being private contractors, have nothing to do with the regime with which we as a country have issues. Whereas I agree that Norrie is indeed being unethical in accepting the Saudi dollar, I'm not sure it's fair to say that there's no ethical consideration in allowing Russian players to compete at a Grand Slam. After all, by allowing them to play, the AELTC and the LTA, the All England club that is, would be effectively giving Russian citizens quite a large amount of prize money, even to compete in the first round, and yet British businesses are currently told to boycott any business dealings or dealings with wealthy Russian citizens because of the war in Ukraine. Therefore, there is a similarity in the All England striking such commercial deal with a Russian star player. Surely am I right in saying that these players are Russian citizens, such as Medvedev, Rublev, Khachanov? They are. It's an interesting ethical question, and I'm sure one that will continue to run. Calvin, what do you think? Are they completely different situations in your eyes?
I think they are completely different, because there's as is it Danny?
Danny, yeah.
Yeah, as Danny pointed out, that basically the UK stopped all big Russian money taking anything out of the UK, but they stopped the oligarch. They froze the assets of the oligarchs. That was different because they were directly linked to Putin. That was a specific reason. If you were a Russian person working in Britain, your money wasn't withheld. And if you were a self-employed person working in Britain, which is what the tennis players would have been, their money wasn't... That was perfectly fine. You could work as a Russian in Britain during that time. There was nothing to stop you doing that. It was specifically the oligarchs' money and the assets were frozen. On top of that, again, we come to it that the tennis players they didn't have any direct links to Putin, and they were mostly, well, as far as we know, they were all opposed to what Putin was doing. And they also said that they would play without taking any prize money, and still weren't allowed to play. Whereas Cam Norrie, and again, I feel a bit bad at this, because I don't know, it's the only time I've ever criticised Cam Norrie, and I do like Cam, and I like everything about him, but I think this is an error of judgment. Basically, this is completely different because he's just choosing. The Russian players had no choice, whereas Cam is just choosing to take money off a despot, brutal regime, and that is what he is doing.
Yeah, I think that's the important delineation to make as well. And I had to do it a lot. I mentioned being in Beijing for the Olympics, and the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese regime is committing human rights abuses left, right, and centre. It's an incredibly corrupt regime. And an incredibly brutal one, and I don't think the Olympics should have been there at all. But it's very important when you're talking about this and when you're thinking about it kind of delineate the Chinese regime from the Chinese people. And sometimes actions that you make against a state and a government will inadvertently, as a consequence, hurt the people who are governed by that state or regime. But when it comes to the way we think about it, the way we talk about it, if there are ways of helping those people, or working with those people, or giving those people the basic rights that they deserve, such as the right to work or the right to do business, then, and you can do that without benefiting the state, then I think we should. Now, George, I think the point that you wanted to make was that the kind of taxation point, right? That the money that would have been paid to the Russian players, albeit that they would have donated to charity, they say, would have still have been taxed in Russia, or would have been eligible to be taxed in Russia?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I was more asking the question. I was just trying to get into the headspace of Wimbledon. As Calvin pointed out, though, I imagine a few of the Russian lads are based in Monte Carlo, so probably aren't paying any tax, full stop. But I was thinking a little further down the food chain probably might have been the case that it would go through that. But I personally found it very interesting to hear how players are paid at tournaments from Calvin, which not to bore you all with it, we had quite a monotonous discussion around.
You say it's monotonous.
I found it interesting, but I fear others might find it less.
I mean, to sum it up, Calvin, basically, you sort of, once you've lost, or if you win the tournament, you go in and sort of agree how much you're getting paid. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. Basically, what happens, I know this is what happens at Wimbledon, and I assume it's the same as what happens at all the ATP events, is that you have basically, when you have your rackets restrung, for example, that goes through the tournament. So you hand your rackets and you take them back. They keep a record on how many rackets you've had restrung or customized through the people there, and they take that out of your prize money. If you've had any code violations or that kind of thing, that comes out of your prize money. So once you're out, you have to go to the referee and basically sign off on the prize money that you should be receiving. Say, like, I've had 25 rackets restrung this week, and I've had 2 code violations.
I would find it quite amusing if Nick Kyrgios went out first round, but had 8 code violations along the way, and went along to the referee's office, and they went, actually, you owe us a bit of cash here, Nick.
You can't have 8 code violations. You can only have 3.
Oh, that's true.
You're out of the tournament then. So, it wouldn't surprise me if that has occurred. But I don't think there would have been any problem. And I'll say also on that as well, I don't think any of us would have any problems with any Saudi Arabian people coming to work and take money in Britain. And that's the differentiation. They're completely different, and this is specifically taking money from despot, horrid regimes and being a member, like you said, James, being a part of the people who they rule over.
George.
At risk of dragging this out any further, but the code violation point is actually quite an interesting one, Calvin, isn't it? Because in terms of players signing up when they're leaving, I mean, like Wimbledon quite often don't release who's been fined once, and I'm sure, they don't release who's been fined until after the tournament referee's gone through and kind of assessed the incidents and decided whether they should be fined. But surely quite often people have signed out the tournament long before their code violations. Are they then just chased up for final bits of cash like when they leave?
I don't know. I assume they know already before they're released. But
they sit on them for ages, don't they?
But you get a few incidents that happen when players like leaving tour. I'm thinking of like Mladenovic here the other year when she was fined £10,000 because of a row over booking a cab out of Wimbledon when she'd been eliminated. That fine presumably came after she'd signed out of the tournament.
Right, maybe, yeah. I'm not sure now that.
I assume, and I mean, we're basically getting into some quite complicated backing here, but I assume it's like a pre-authorization. And, you sort of sign it conditionally upon certain things, or the balance maybe isn't settled. I don't know, maybe the prize money's not paid out until the end of the tournament. And
there is some of the tournaments are slightly different how they do it. Like, I know the Australian Open, for tax reasons, allow a certain amount of restrings. That they pay you less money in prize money. They pay the players less money, but they give, I think it's 15 free rackets a day, or five free rackets a day. You can get whereas at Wimbledon you pay for every racket that you have restrung.
I mean that is like that'll be an accounting thing, won't it? Because
Yeah,
of the different
and
rates
I think
for tax
they pay more per diem as well. Per diem is what the tournament gives you for accommodation while you're there, and I think they pay more of that, but the prize money is less.
I see. Okay, the happy slam kicking in again.
Yeah.
The happy tax efficient slam. Anyway, the Diriyah Cup in Saudi Arabia is not the happy slam. They've added Alexander Zverev to their player list this week, which, I mean, it's not going to make anyone hate the tournament more, but I can't imagine it's going to make many people hate the tournament less. He sort of made the same point, albeit it was an interview with the official YouTube channel of the tournament, but he, I think, kind of tried to preempt criticism by saying, I'm just looking forward to being back on tour and to getting matches, of course. You don't want your first event to be back in Australia, because then you feel like, okay, you may be fit physically, you may be in the shape of your life, but you haven't played matches in 7 months. It's a different fitness level. It's still a different mental stress. And of course, who could not sympathise with Alexander Zverev, because there are no other tournaments before the Australian Open. Like, literally, it's Diriyah Cup or you go in cold. There's no 250 in Pune. There certainly aren't two 250s in Adelaide. There's no 250 in Auckland either, so he can't play any of those tournaments. He can't play for his country at the United Cup. I actually don't know if they've qualified, so it might be unfair. George?
Could have rang up Rafa as well, got on this exhibition tour in South America. He could have had a...
No, but Rafa's too tired. They're too busy and tired to travel and play tournaments during the off-season. It sort of. We'll come on to that later.
Sports Social, now on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello, I'm Ashley Blaker, and I'm hosting a new season of the comedy panel show Never Write Off the Germans, in partnership with My Diesel Claim. Join me and my esteemed comedy guests as we discuss all that's ridiculous with the greatest show on earth this winter in a host nation with domestic football equivalent to the Isthmian League South. We'll guide you through the tournament, covering everything that's funny with the countries taking part, whether you're a die-hard fan or an occasional bandwagon jumper just supporting your home nation until they're embarrassingly knocked out by Iran. Listen on the Sports Social Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts, but remember, never write off the Germans.
Sports Social, now on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Join me, David Seaman, every week on my podcast, Seaman Says. We'll have all the reaction to the biggest matches, and I chat to some of my former England teammates like Gary Lineker. You always seem to score past me.
I want to thank you for enhancing my career.
And current stars like Aaron Ramsdale.
Was David a diva?
David had his own dressing room and everything.
Yeah. Listen to Seaman Says right now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you soon.
The famous Sloping Pitch podcast. We're following the greatest show on earth. But would you like pitch-side seats for all the action in Qatar? The heat, the goals, the drama? Well, so would we. But why not join me, Nick Hancock, in Stoke-on-Trent and co-host Chris England in London's SW16? Every game live from England. The famous Sloping Pitch podcast. We think this tournament could be okay.
Sports Social.
Well, speaking of Rafa Nadal, we might as well get into it. I'm hesitant to bring up something I tweeted and got an enormous amount of abuse about, but I muted this tweet long ago, so I've actually just opened it again to make sure what I said, and there's a load of other abuse that I I hadn't previously read, so that's really good actually. I muted this tweet to preserve my mental health, and now I've had to open it up again. This is the kind of lengths we go to on the Love Tennis podcast to, whore ourselves out. I tweeted thus: tennis players, i.e. tennis players are saying, the season's too long, we're exhausted, we can't possibly play all these different tournaments. Also tennis players, we're going on a 2-week exhibition tour during the off-season. As I mentioned, and as George mentioned before the break, Rafa Nadal is on an exhibition tour of South America with Casper Ruud, which is happened. Well, it took place at the same time as the Davis Cup finals, and unfortunately, we're talking about this before we're talking about Davis Cup finals. But I'm afraid that is the nature of tennis at the moment. I mean, I don't know how much more there is to say, but I wanted to mention it anyway. George, Mark Petchey replied to it and made me laugh by saying, "'Tis the season of wheelbarrows." Which I think probably pretty much sums it up. I mean, South America doesn't have many massive tournaments, as we've said before, and I'm sure Rafa and Casper are getting paid an absolute fortune to do it.
Yeah, and I think, the other argument you'll kind of hear around this sort of season is that they're taking the sport to somewhere it's not been to before. But it's quite rare for these lot to actually. Maybe Rude does it a bit more than other people, but there are events that go on over in South America. Now Rafa could turn up to an ATP Challenger, I'm sure, in Bogota or something if he'd.
Well, I mean, he could have played Rio, like if
play Rio,
yeah.
play everything. And he has done in the past, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. It's obviously very hypocritical. I don't particularly blame them for going off and doing this sort of big event. They're not going to some terrible murderous society and taking money from a regime, and they are at the end of the day trying to make a buck or whatever. So that's up to them. But yeah, it does really invalidate this whole pertinent and fair discussion, I think, around the calendar quite often. And I'm not saying an exhibition is as physically demanding as a tour event or whatever, and I'm sure they can be a little bit more relaxed about it, but it doesn't really give credence to serious calendar system issues, as we've again talked about in previous weeks.
Also, I realised that one of the reasons that tweet attracted quite so many what's the word? Other accounts. Haters is one word. Unusual accounts is maybe the best way I'm going to put it. Is because it was retweeted by the most unusual tennis Twitter account of all. I'm not going to name him because I don't need to, because you both know who I'm talking about realistically. Anyway, we'll move on and talk about what we should have been talking about all week last week, but frankly it was a bit of a non-event, and it was the Davis Cup finals. Canada came through victorious. Denis Shapovalov and Felix Auger-Aliassime beating Thanasi Kokkinakis and Alex de Minaur in the finals, so they didn't even have to play doubles. Calvin, I feel like we talk about Felix and to a slightly lesser extent Denis a huge amount on this podcast. Felix obviously had a brilliant end to the year, clearly just in a really good moment, as football managers would say. But he's also had a terrific year in team tennis. He's won the ATP Cup, he's won the Laver Cup, and now he's won the Davis Cup. Just to give you an idea who he's beaten in the Davis Cup, by the way, Alcaraz, Kekmanovic, Oscar Otte, less impressive, de Minaur and Musetti, and he also played 3 doubles matches and won all 3 of them. I mean, it's not a Grand Slam, but it feels like a pretty good springboard, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's been pivotal in all those wins as well. It's not like he's just sort of, been scouring, hovering around. He beat Djokovic in Laver Cup. And
the ATP Cup, by the way, he beat Zverev, Norrie, and Bautista Agut, which is pretty handy.
He's a brilliant tennis player. I just really hope he can make the next step now and start racking up the slams. It's there for him if he can put his mind to it, and if he can make the minor improvements he needs, then he's going to be winning more than one, I would say.
There's the old cliche in football that you either do want the international break to come or you don't want the international break to come. And I kind of get the feeling Felix would really rather a slam was happening next week rather than going into the off-season. I mean, how hard is it to kind of keep that momentum going through the off-season, Calvin? Do you kind of have to completely separate it, or are you trying to? Would you keep with Julian and Henry next year? How will you be trying to foster that form going into next season when you have a bit of a break?
Well, he's only given them 1 week off, mostly.
Yeah, it's a strange one, I mean, in actuality, it's 1 week and probably about 3 weeks without tournaments, which you would normally do anyway. But it just feels more than that. It feels like you've drawn a line and starting a new one, I suppose. So you never, it'll be interesting to see how all the players respond. Historically, the players who've done well at the end of one year haven't necessarily carried it on straight into another. That's not always how. And like I say, being that it's, that there's less time between, say, the first American hardcourt tournament and the US Open than there is. Sorry, there's less time now than there is between now and the Australian Open than there is between the first US hardcourt tournament and the US Open. So,
right, yeah, okay.
That's a strange dynamic of it, because we don't really have a close season.
No.
You know, closed season in other sports is that you're doing a 6-week training block. As I just said, with the lads who I coach, it's 2 weeks. They'll have 1 week off and then 2 weeks training.
I think this might have been something that you told me, Calvin, but someone's saying that there are quite a few players on tour who actually have a sort of pre-season, quote unquote, after the Australian Open and take a couple of weeks off and then do a block ahead of the Sunshine Swing. Is that right?
Yeah. I've known that happen. A couple of the British players do that. I think Evo tends to do a bit of that.
Because there's a bigger gap.
Yeah, but you do still sort of call this the closed season just because there's nothing to play in.
Yeah.
You don't have any options other than if you're doing exhibitions, then.
But it is interesting because if you look at it, I mean, the Australian Open is on, I think, the 16th of January. Like, we've kind of, because we've not had a normal Australian Open for 3 years, I'd kind of forgotten that if you did take an off-season, at this time of year, you sort of have to start up again, like, next week, because it's, most top players want 6 weeks before a slam, at least. I mean, if you think about 6 weeks before Wimbledon, I guess Wimbledon's a bad example, but as you say, Calvin, 6 weeks before the US Open, you're already into your hardcourt tournaments. You're pretty much starting there. So it is quite a condensed run to the Australian Open. So I imagine a decent number of players might look at it. If that was what they were doing, and they thought, well, a good way to start that is going to South America and play some exhibitions, then fine, but it's obviously not necessarily the reality. I'm not going to get dragged into that again. George, talk to me about Felix and Denis, and they've both played really well for their country over the years. I mean, probably the first that anybody heard of Denis Shapovalov in Britain was when he got DQ'd from a Davis Cup match for pinging a ball into an umpire's face. Was that against Kyle Edmund? Have I got that right?
It was, yeah.
But since then, he has more than rehabilitated. Well, he's still quite angry, but he's not done that in a while. So it's got better, and he's had some brilliant results on the court, under the Canadian flag.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say Shapovalov's become a bit of a forgotten man in many ways this year. It feels to me like, at the start of the year, we were really probably hoping we'd have both of them in the top 10. I can't actually remember where Denis is ranked now. I imagine still just about top 20 would be my guess.
I think 18, I think.
So it's not been such a bad season that it's been catastrophic, but, he's a guy who's so talented and got so many great weapons. It's just making these final steps is difficult. And, I like to think that the two of them will push each other on, and that was always the dynamic I was kind of hoping for with these two, because it's nice when you have two guys from the same country being quite high up, pushing each other. But Denis has to do some catching up, I think. Felix is really starting to turn the corner, I hope, anyway. We've said that a few times before about players, and it's totally not materialised, but I'm feeling quite good about Felix all of a sudden.
Yeah, Felix, I'm the same, George. Felix, I think, is close. Denis, I've got serious doubts about. Just in terms of the season he's had, I think he's got a lot of growing up to do, like just emotionally and mentally. Like, you hear him talk sometimes, and like that nonsense about his girlfriend not being able to practice at Queen's when there was no actual reason why she should have been able to practice at Queen's. He sort of came across like a bit like a spoiled child there. And I also at Wimbledon this year, I might have been sat outside at the restaurant at a particularly non-busy time of the day, and he came and sat on the next table to me and was having a conversation on the phone, and I might have overheard him talking about, it seemed he was talking about his coaching situation or lack thereof and his tennis, and it didn't fill me with confidence that he's ready to make a step to being a serious tennis player, the sort of things he was saying. I won't go into what he was saying, but yeah, it's not really. If I was coaching a player, it wouldn't have been what I would be wanting them to be saying.
I think, if we're looking at his year as well, I mean, he started the year pretty strong. Like, if you looked at him and Felix actually did okay as well, but, they obviously won that ATP Cup together, and then he played, beat Zverev really comfortably at the Australian Open and had that kind of 5-set thriller with Nadal that he actually probably should have won that day, really. Like, he was playing good enough stuff to win that match, and Rafa was looking pretty wounded. And then it kind of nosedived from there. And, I do hope that there'll be a spring back to him, because he's one of my favourite players to watch by a long way. In terms of what he's got that kind of backhand, jumping backhand, deep defensive backhand on a one hand. I've always
but you say that though, George. You say that about that backhand. That backhand is crap.
Yeah, but
right? It's like it
but
looks
it's pretty
flashy.
and fun, isn't it? It's flashy, but
it's brilliant.
I'm not saying
Brilliant
it's a great shot,
when he
but
misses, he makes one and misses 7. Like,
but it's fun. This is Calvin Killjoy here. It's still fun,
he's not
isn't
going
it?
to win. He's not going to win. He's not going to win proper matches with that backhand. It's nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense.
It is fun, if nothing else.
Fun for his opponents. 3 points all over the shop. Give him a high backhand, he'll go for that rubbish jump backhand that he thinks is great.
It's actually interesting because I think I was talking to someone. I'm trying to remember who I was talking to, but telling me about like a game plan against players like Denis, and they and funnily enough, the backhand didn't really come up. I think there are quite a lot of other ways to beat him. Like, I think there are lots of players out there who aren't scared of Denis Shapovalov. And when you combine that with what we've talked about his kind of mental weaknesses, or not weakness is the wrong word, but he's not the coolest of characters in the world. I don't think even he would necessarily say that he is. I think when you combine those things, it makes matches 5% harder to win. When the guy on the other side of the net is going, well, I think I should probably be winning this match. Like it gives you less.
Yeah.
I just want to say on that backhand, he's been on the scene now. How long has he been on the scene? About 5 years, would you say?
Sure.
Yes. He had his big 17-year-old breakthrough beating Rafa.
Right. So how many of those jump backhands have you seen him hit? Just give me a ballpark. How many have you seen him hit in that amount of time?
That is a question I have no answer to.
Would you say 30? And how many good ones have you seen him hit?
I mean that is
great.
I reckon less than 3.
I love this random maths of shots I've apparently seen.
But that's indicative of it. It's like James said. No, I tell you what the players think. Right? They think he's flashy and he'll beat himself. That's the way that they think about it. They think, right, just stay solid. He'll do something stupid, and he always does. And the players aren't worried about the best players aren't worried about guys who. They don't think about, and I bang on about this a lot, and I know I sound like a bit of a broken record. You don't judge a player by their top level. You judge a player by their middle and their bottom levels. And Denis Shapovalov's top level is phenomenal. But the players don't think, they think, yeah, I'll play him 15 times, he'll beat me once.
Will anyone be able to change that in him? Because, if you've got...
Well, this is what I was saying, what I overheard him saying to either a prospective coach or a psychologist, or I don't think it was a psychologist, he wouldn't have been doing it so openly, but whoever he was talking to when I overheard him, then my thinking is that he doesn't think that is something that needs changing.
And Jamie Delgado wasn't there and not there for very long, and I'm reasonably sure that was a personality clash, if nothing else. But you don't have big personality clashes with coaches that only last a month if there's not something a bit defective going on in that relationship. I think he's got some growing up to do. That's my instinct. And look, he's just won a Davis Cup for his country. There are a lot of positives here. And all right, he's played number 2 singles, which there aren't many better number 2 singles players in the world than Denis Shapovalov by the nature of the strength in depth that Canada have. But nevertheless, he still has work to do. I mean, if I'm actually looking at his record at the Davis Cup finals, he lost to Sonego in the semis. He lost to Struff in the groups against Germany. They're both matches that someone like Denis Shapovalov should probably be winning. And he played well and beat Kokkinakis in the final, at least.
He doesn't have any... I can't remember. I might be getting this wrong. He doesn't have any big wins in big tournaments.
George?
He beat. Well, I'd say. Well, you'll say he's not a big win. I'd say Zverev is a big win at the Australian Open. The way Zverev played in Slam.
Not the way that. Yeah, the way Zverev's played in Slam. All the others have got all the. They've either won a big tournament or they've got some big wins. And you look at when Murray was coming through. Murray, even before he won slams, Murray was beating Djokovic at slams, beating Federer at slams, beating Nadal. I don't know if he's ever beaten Nadal at slams.
I don't think he has. Yeah,
No, but
terrible.
Beat the guy, beating Roddick at slams, that kind of thing. Whereas even at Masters Series, I just don't remember him beating. I don't think. Well, he's never beat Djokovic. I don't think he's ever beaten Nadal.
He's beaten Nadal twice.
Rafa.
Yeah, his big breakthrough win was Nadal.
Yeah.
Oh, I do remember that. Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
he won the Paris Masters, didn't he?
He beat Nadal on clay like this year, but I'm pretty sure it was Nadal's first match in goodness knows how long, and he wasn't fit. And he just had, I'm struggling. I mean, I'm looking at his wins against top 10 players. It's interesting that 3 of his 11 wins against top 10 players have come in team tournaments. Like, he beat Zverev in an ATP Cup. He beat Tsitsipas in an ATP Cup. Like, there's out there, but maybe that's the kind of tournament that focuses him. I don't know. Like, he's the kind of guy who maybe needs a bit of accountability.
I was just going to say as well, I mean, like, we talk about him still being top 20 now, but got a fair amount of points that will probably drop off from Australia and ATP Cup, I'd guess, at the start of next year. That makes him in a bit of a perilous position. And, we were talking about Calvin's ranking challenges with Henry and Julian. There's something to be said about when you're ranked pretty highly, you're guaranteed not to have, well, not guaranteed, but you're less likely to have really bad first and second round draws, and that can kind of maintain you for quite a long time. But if your form's bad and you drop out of seeding positions and you start having to go into tournaments unseeded and you're not playing well and you're drawing top guys, that's can be a bit of a recipe for a downward spiral. So you want to arrest that pretty quickly and have a good run out there.
Now that we've annoyed all of our Canadian listeners by slagging off Denis Shapovalov, should we annoy all our American listeners by slagging off their Davis Cup team? I think we shall. This is maybe my favourite story of the week. I don't know about favourite. It's unpleasant in some ways, but as one of my co-workers would say, there's a lot of tea here to be drunk. So it's time to spill it. Basically, the Americans lost in the quarterfinals to Italy. And it came down to a decisive doubles match after Francis Tiafoe lost to Lorenzo Sonego, and then Taylor Fritz beat Lorenzo Musetti. Came down to a crucial doubles match. Italy have got an established pair in Davis Cup of Bolelli and Fognini. Mardy Fish had world number 2 doubles player Rajiv Ram at his disposal, but did not pick him, and instead picked Tommy Paul and Jack Sock, who lost 6-4, 6-4. And needless to say, this went kind of punchy. Rajiv Ram tweeted, how's everyone's Thanksgiving going? Shortly after the United States got dumped out. Joe Salisbury stuck the result on his Instagram and said, if only the USA had someone better for doubles. Oh wait, thinking emoji, covering of eyes emoji. I think that's technically see no evil, that emoji, by the way. Just not many people know that. Mardy Fish defended his selection, said we've got a lot of great players that play for US. Rajiv is one of them. He wasn't on the team this year, and that's my choice. This is the team that I put on the court, so if anyone has an issue with that, that's on me. Rajiv has played, and he's played well. He's played for us a few times with Jack, and this is a team that I was excited to see. Jack and Francis are also a phenomenal team. They've played and beaten some really good teams in competitions as well, so we had a lot of options. This was the team we went with today, but if Rajiv was here or not, those guys are going to win today. They played well, and they're too good. I mean, Calvin, you coach a good doubles team, and one day they may be subject to these kind of selection decisions. Who knows? But I mean, tennis is a results business, and if you pick a team and they lose, you're going to get some flack for it.
My understanding is that it was Jack Sock who chose his doubles partner. That is the feeling within the players, and I think that's pretty well sourced. And it was his decision. I think Mardy Fisher's I don't know how much Mardy Fish backed it, but I think that might have been, well, obviously he did back it, but he's either covering it up or he entirely agreed with it. It was an absolutely rotten decision, an absolute shocker. And Mardy Fish coming out, that's just waffle that he's come out with at the end. You've got to own it. If you want to pick that team, that's fair enough. Pick whoever you want, or give the backing for whoever you want. But you got to come out and go, we picked the wrong team. Coming out with, if Rajiv would have been here, then they'd have won anyway. That's just absolute nonsense. You've got someone as good as Rajiv Ram playing, somebody in a pairing who just won 2 matches and played. They beat Murray and Salisbury. Apart from anything else, Tommy Paul's not that good a doubles player.
Yeah, I mean that was the biggest thing for me. Is like I like Tommy Paul. I think he's a good player, and he's got some nice hands and stuff. But he's not a great doubles player, is he?
Yeah, but I don't know. They've had a shocker all around. They've had an absolute shocker all around. There's two. Also, I look at that team, and I say no offense intended, but I am really offending them all. It's not full of highly intelligent individuals. The team and the captaincy is not like somebody you'd think, they're going to make good calls.
I'm going to put some Tommy Paul tweets out there because kid got fired up on Twitter. For play to him. He said, one of them was, "It's cool to see people who will never be Davis Cup captains pretending to be Davis Cup captains on Twitter. Hashtag tweeting from your parents' basement." He also, in one tweet that he's now deleted, he said, "You obviously didn't have tennis TV in your parents' basement during Glasgow. Doubles number 1 or 100. He struggles against singles players ranked 1 to 8,000 singles or doubles," which is pretty darn punchy.
I think that backs up what I just said about not having anyone with great intelligence in there. Also, being Davis Cup captain isn't a meritocracy.
Well,
it's like let's making out that it's something that Marty Fisher's earned over a long period of managing his way up. He's done that because he used to have a big serve. Like that's the only reason he's Davis Cup captain.
Yeah, it's a funny job, isn't it? George, I know you love beef.
I do love the beef. I think Ram kind of said they only took 4 rather than 5 players as well. I think that's as weird as anything. Like, why not just? You'd still take the guy just in case, wouldn't you? If you've got kind of the squad to play.
Well, I tell you that I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't know Rajiv very well, but I've spoken to him a few times, and I got a bit of a feel for him. And if you look at the group they've got, Taylor Fritz, Francis Tiafoe, Tommy Paul, Jack Sock, and I think Calvin will back this up. Rajiv is quite a different person from those guys.
Yeah, Rajiv would have, as I just said, from what I just said, Rajiv would have tripled the intelligence on that squad.
But he's also a different character, not only necessarily a different caliber of man, but a different character. Some people like this young American group, some people don't. They're entitled to their opinion, obviously. Rajiv is quite a reserved guy. I know when they were put together, him and Joe Salisbury, and funny enough, I spoke to Henry and Julian about this. Louis said to them, "One of you's got to be kind of the hype man on this team and the guy to pick us up when we're down." And Louis said to Rajiv, "We kind of need you to be that guy." And it was difficult because neither of them are naturally that kind of person. And I think Louis said something similar to your guys, Calvin. But I can see how, George, you say you might as well take the 5th guy. I don't know. I mean, clearly these guys don't like Rajiv Ram, full stop.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's fair enough. But if you're a captain of a team and you've got a guy ranked number 3 in one of the disciplines and you've got a space in your squad, to not take that guy, who I don't think is necessarily the bad guy in this situation without knowing the ins and outs of it, is a big call. And to be honest, the sort of call, if it was as Calvin put across, a meritocracy, that you fall on your sword for when you get wrong, because he's got this badly wrong, Fish, in my opinion. He's a far superior doubles player to Tommy Paul, and him and Sock should be one of the best doubles teams out there comfortably. I mean, that's a team that can win you the Davis Cup versus not winning it.
There's 2 things I'd say about it. Is that the first one is that who do you think the Italians would have rather faced? And I'm pretty certain they'd rather face Tommy Paul on the Juice side and Jack Sock. No one wants to play Jack Sock. Jack Sock, I think Jack Sock's an idiot, but he's a phenomenal doubles player. But he would play. But I think again, he won't have necessarily thought that Tommy Paul's a better player than Rajiv Ram. He'll just want to take his mates, and that's how Jack Sock's mentality is. But secondly, again, I'll say it again. I sort of said it earlier, but with all that, with Fish and the players and Tommy Paul saying what he said at the end there, look, you've got to own it. If you make a call like that and you don't get the job done, you've got to own it, and you've got to go, we thought this was the right call, but in hindsight, we should have played Rajiv. You can't be going. You can't be going. Oh, we'd have lost any. He wouldn't have made any difference. And everybody knows that. Everybody knows that Rajiv struggles against singles players when he plays them. Like, does he? I'm not. He didn't struggle that much against. Well, didn't struggle that much against Andy Murray, did he? And there aren't many better singles players than Andy Murray.
Yeah, I think it's funny, isn't it? Because that captaincy role, like. You get so kind of wrapped up in like, right, this is the decision we're making, and we're really gonna back this to the hilt. That when you then do lose, it's very difficult to switch that mindset. However, I think it's weird and misguided that Mardy Fish came out and tried to sort of take responsibility for the defeat by saying, it's my decision and I'm owning it, but then not say the decision was wrong. But I suppose if you've got to work with those players, you've got to work. If Jack Sock has led that decision and, has been backed in that decision by his teammates, and then the captain has gone, yeah, all right, I'm with you. I see what you're saying. Let's do this. And then you've got to captain them again. I can see maybe. I mean, I think it's weak and I think it's poor leadership, but I can see that you might decide that that's the way to go with explaining that decision. But be fascinating. I can't remember who the US have drawn in qualifiers, but I'd be fascinated to see who they get.
The best thing about it, am I right in saying, because I didn't see the final, didn't then Italy go and do the same thing and take out Bolelli?
Yeah, but they didn't have to play the final, right? They didn't have to play so they could have changed.
Oh, right, okay.
Because it was 2-0.
I know that we'd heard that they'd announced that they were going to play Berrettini instead.
So they did. No, I'm sorry. In the semi-final against Canada, yeah, they pulled out Bolelli and put Berrettini in, and then they lost to Auger-Aliassime and Pospisil. Yeah.
So they obviously didn't learn from it either then.
No, exactly. I mentioned there that there are qualifiers to deal with next year. The United States have drawn Uzbekistan away from home, which, it's not somewhere you want to go on a cold Tuesday night, is it? It's Stoke upon Uzbek. Great Britain have drawn Colombia away, which means they're almost certainly going to be playing on clay in February. Calvin, I feel like Britain will definitely be favourites in this because their top-ranked singles player is Daniel Galan, and they haven't got anyone inside the top 250 beyond that. But Colombia, tough place to go.
And tough doubles.
It's very tough. They're going to have... I mean, the doubles team are not what they were. The doubles team now are down at, I think they're the mid-20s ranking.
It's Cabal and Farah, isn't it?
But they're obviously... They're obviously good on clay. They've won the French Open a few times. But they're not the force they were. The main problems... Say they're favourites and probably are, but the conditions are going to be rough. It's going on clay at altitude, because I assume they'll play in Bogota.
Hang on, I might. Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. I don't know what the altitude in Bogota is, but it's quite high. There you go.
It's high, yeah.
8,000 feet above sea level.
Yeah, that's high, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that is high. Yeah,
that's
correct.
Very high. Yeah. That's, there might be an issue, with who fancies going for that.
Yeah, it'll be like it's straight a week after the Australian Open.
Yeah.
I don't see Murray going, but that might actually be a blessing in disguise.
I don't think Murray's going to fancy it. Evo, I don't know what his
Evo loves playing Davis Cup though. Yes, and no one's going to want to do that. But I think if anyone goes, Evo goes.
He'll go if he's guaranteed a place in the doubles team.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
100%. That's what he'll say.
Who's going to play doubles? Drapes. Is Drape going to fancy it? Noz?
Yeah. I don't know. It's tricky.
If I were Draper, I'd try and go.
It's how it affects the rest of the season, though, George. It's how you got the running for Indian Wells starts not long after that.
He's not played a match for Britain though, Davis Cup, has he yet? I think that would be quite a good thing to tick off on your. I don't know Jack, but that would be something.
I'm not saying they won't. I'm saying it's not straightforward. It's not like if they were playing America on outdoor hard in California, everyone's going. But it's who fancies that change of surface, going and play on clay at 8,000 feet altitude. Jeez.
Maybe Carl Edmund will be fit by then. I saw he was in the Pro League.
Played Pro League, this week.
He won Pro League, I think I'm right in saying.
Yeah.
He won Pro League.
You would kind of hope so, to be honest, wouldn't you? I mean, like, I know he's
but
you'd hope for this. His tennis was staying at a level where he can win that.
Yeah,
he struggled a bit in the early rounds. Went to a couple of tie breaks, a couple of final set tie breaks.
Lot of those games went to deuce.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say I'd say Leon probably grimaced a bit when he saw that come out. It's not one that I'd fancy.
I mean, looking at the unseeded teams, like I think it's maybe the worst one. Like South Korea would have been a pain in the arse to go to, but as you say, not the altitude problem. Uzbekistan, I guess, it's also quite a long way to go. But and again, Chile,
you're going to play. It's the travel, but you're also going to play on you're probably going to play on hard and it's not altitude.
No.
It changes a lot. You only have to look at Bolivia's World Cup qualifying record to know what altitude does.
Yes, indeed. George, sorry?
I was just going to say, I still predict Norrie, Draper, and Evans will all go. I think Murray's the only one who actually won't go.
Interesting.
They won't all go because one of them's not going to play, and no one's going to fancy going there if they're not playing.
Yeah, I wonder how far down that'll cascade. Like at what point do we start dragging people out of retirement to be the third singles player?
Leon's going to use doubles as a bartering chip to Dan. He'll be like, Dan, you can play doubles this time.
Dan's not going to go if he's not playing singles. Dan's not going to go if he's not playing singles. No chance.
I think Leon's got a strong bartering chip there. No.
That's what I mean.
I think the strong bartering chip might be a business class ticket.
That's what I mean, though, where it's going to be difficult. No one's going to fancy that. People are going to want guarantees they're playing if they're going to be in the team.
Yeah, it's not easy. It'd be fascinating to see who gets picked. A little subplot there. I mean, I'll be interested to see if Rajiv Ram. Can you imagine if Mardy Fish gives Rajiv Ram a call, the day after the Australian Open final, and says, "Oh, mate, do you fancy Uzbekistan next week? Yeah, be all right." I cannot imagine. It's like, will you guarantee a play? Can't do that, mate. Got to pick the team the night before, yeah?
I bet Jack Sock doesn't fancy it. I'd put money now. I bet you Jack Sock's not in Uzbekistan.
I can't wait to see this. I'm not quite excited about this, really. Davis Cup qualifying teams. And I never thought that would be the case.
Any other good ties? Or is
Croatia, Austria has lots of plots to it. I mean, because you have Choric and team there potentially.
Comeback year. So
Norway, Serbia. That could be Ruud versus Djokovic in theory. That'd be very tasty. Just looking down a few others that have. I mean, it's always tricky because the draw is 12 seeded teams drawn against 12 unseeded teams. So not many of these are going to be absolute classics. And there's obviously Canada and Australia have wildcards into the finals already. Remember, the winner of this goes into the Davis Cup finals. They get in on the basis of having reached the final, and Italy and Spain also have been awarded wildcards straight in, so they don't have to play the qualifiers. Those two wildcards, by the way, are just, we think you've got the best players and need you to be there. And they're worried about, look, Canada lost in qualifiers. That happened. So,
am I right in saying that Britain need to win this game also to host the Davis Cup? Is there a bit of a hanger there on this, or is that just like the earlier stages? Did I read that?
George, that's a great question that a well-informed journalist will be able to answer. If you know any of them, then please let me know. It's a good question. I mean, they got in automatically. This time on the the women got into Billie Jean King Cup finals, despite having lost in qualifiers. I don't know is the honest answer. I'm sorry not to be more up to speed on that. I will find out. Ask me again next week when I've been on holiday for 10 days, and then I'll definitely know. Very finally, I want to mention something, and we're not going to just have time to discuss it, and there's actually not a lot to add to it, but it's important to mention it. A story that people will have perhaps been aware of is a series of allegations that have been raised against the president of the Polish Tennis Association, Miroslav Skripczynski. The allegations have been made by an MP, a serving MP called Katarzyna Kotula, who says that she was sexually abused as a child repeatedly by Skripczynski, He's someone who's had an enormous impact on Polish tennis, which is obviously in a real boom moment. So it's a hugely significant story. I will post a link to the interview in the show notes. I encourage you to read it through Google Translate. It is in Polish. The kind of key moments, talking about Skrzynski, who was a coach when she was 13 or 14. She has one sentence he used to repeat over and over again. It was his favourite. When a woman says no, she means yes, which probably jars against the ears of people now, probably even did then. She says she was 13 and 14 years old when he sexually assaulted me at least a dozen times over 3 years when I was staying at the energetic Grifino club. Iga Świątek has spoken about it at length on Twitter. I'll put a link to all that as well. But she says, I feel like as current leader of women's tennis, I can't be silent about particular matters. I remember that I appreciate having the freedom to decide whether I want to speak up about something. She goes on to say that she's urging a major investigation into all of this because it's so serious, and speaks to how important it is that players have the opportunity to speak out and seek support and hotlines and organisations when these kind of things happen. It's a slightly somber note to end the podcast on, and I apologise for that, but it's an important issue, and I think people should read about it if they can. We've obviously spoken about similar things earlier this year. The film Out, which we're hoping will be made about a similar topic, and it's important. Thank you as always for listening to the Love Tennis podcast. Please do come back next week.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
I'm General Manager Ethan Rosignol at Dark Horse Toyota in Silver Spring. The demand for new cars has never been higher and inventory is tight. But Dark Horse Toyota in Silver Spring has the inventory and the right car for you. There's never been a better time and place to buy. Dark Horse Toyota Silver Spring. We will save you time and money. Come find out why Dark Horse Toyota Silver Spring is the region's #1 Toyota store, or get started now at darkhorsetoyota.com.